There's a really good video on YouTube. I'll put a link in the more information section below that illustrates the point better than I can about the relationship between complex post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD as it's usually described for combat vets. It's a TEDx talk by a guy, a young, I think he was like 23 or 24, a young former US Marine. He did a few tours in Afghanistan or Iraq, I can't remember which, and then he came back and he went to a house party and somebody got excited, there was a bit of a fight and they pulled a knife. So he disarmed the guy, as he'd been trained to do, and gave him a bit of a beating, as he'd been trained to do, to neutralise the threat. And now he's got a very heavy prison sentence as a result of that. Now he describes his PTSD as when he was driving down the street in Ohio, or wherever the lad is from, he couldn't drive down the sides of the street anymore. He had to drive up the middle of the street because he was now conditioned, he was neurologically conditioned to fear the sides of the road because that's where the IEDs might be. How does this relate to CPTSD? Well, it's not a one-off. Too much has been made in the mainstream PTSD literature of the necessity for a one-off, highly dramatic, highly traumatic event, and not enough has been spoken about of being forced into and forced to remain in and imprisoned in situations that are antagonistic, aggravating, and painful over long periods of time. And usually, when you say PTSD, usually people will think of that one event. You know, you were stood and your mate got sniped right next to you, or, you know, maybe you were hit by an IED and survived. It was a one-off thing, but you remember it very vividly. It only lasted a few seconds, but it was so awful and so traumatic. The experience burnt itself. The memory, the horror of the experience burnt itself into the neurology. But actually, I realized what he was describing kind of falls outside of the standard PTSD literature as a form of trauma. I personally believe he was traumatized by his standard military training and the whole process of going through the military machine. But that particularly relates to how CPTSD is usually described, which is a situation where your basic survival is either really or symbolically at threat, and you can't distinguish between the real threat and the symbolic threat that is presented, and that you can't escape, that it is inescapable. This manifests I'm presuming if you've got a background only in PTSD, you won't know this. This manifests not as visual, auditory, and kinesthetic flashbacks, meaning, you know, you think about the hideous event of being hit by an IED, and then you remember how it sounds, you remember what you saw, what you heard before, during, and after, and how it felt. This is just the emotional flashback, is just the feelings, the emotions that you would have experienced before, during, and after. The anxiety, the tension, the horror, the mind-numbing fear that spills over into helplessness, where you have that conscious moment of thought, this is it, I'm out, I'm done now, and then coming back around and making an assessment of the damage that's been done, and then the, you know, survivor's guilt, the shame that maybe you could have done something and you didn't, and all, you know, it's a very potent cocktail of emotions that you would experience under these circumstances. And actually, in CPTSD, what you flash back to is not the event itself, but the emotions that the event provoked. Shame, guilt, horror, mind-numbing fear, rage, maybe, that you want to fight back, but that you can't. All these kinds of things. And let's not forget the power of the trauma that is there in being in a situation where you are facing an enemy that most of the time you cannot see, and that most of the time is embedded within a civilian population. You know, we talk a lot on this channel about how CPTSD is created by being forced into double binds, being told to do one job, but the way in which you're told to do the job. So you have a primary injunction, which is kill the baddies, and then the secondary injunction defies the way you do the first injunction. You know, don't harm any civilian targets. That's just one example. What a horrendous double bind that is to be placed into and then locked into under the threat of risk to your health, to your life, and to the health and life of your comrades as well. So when we talk about stress and battle stress and battle fatigue, I think it's hard, but not impossible for civilians to have any insight into it. But our route into having some insight into the stress and the frustration and the building up of a sort of an explosive energy inside of the human being, the mammal that wants primarily to defend itself, would be through the explanation and understanding of double binds. Okay, I probably won't run enough about that one. I hope you're enjoying these videos and I hope they're helping. Thanks very much for your time and your attention, and I will speak to you again soon. Thank you.